Chapter 1. The Girl Who Danced. The abandoned textile mill smelled of cotton and rust, and something older beneath both, a dampness that had settled into the stone long before the Dominion ever arrived. Calliope had stopped noticing it years ago. Now it just smelled like the only place in the city where she could breathe without measuring the breath first. She stood at the center of the empty floor, shoes worn smooth at the ball of the foot, and listened to the silence settle around her. Afternoon light fell through the broken windows in long, fractured angles, catching the dust she'd disturbed on the way in. It made the room look briefly beautiful, the way ruined things sometimes did if you caught them at the right hour. Calliope caught her reflection in one of the cracked windows as she crossed the floor. Dark hair pulled back in a tie that never seemed to hold, a few loose strands already escaping. She was built the way dancers were built, lean, compact, all her strength stored neatly where it could be reached without effort. Her clothes were chosen for the city, not herself. Muted, practical, easy to forget, and in stillness she looked like someone you might pass without noticing. It was only when she moved that the difference became clear. Pale gray eyes tracked space and balance with quiet precision, her body carrying years of discipline the way other people carried habits, unannounced and inescapable. She pressed play. The speakers crackled. The opening notes came out warped, tinny, stripped of half their warmth. But she didn't need the music to be perfect. She just needed it to be present. First position, a breath held, released. She danced. Not the way she moved through the streets, careful and contained, the kind of motion designed to take up as little space as possible. Not the small, deliberate steps that kept her unremarkable to anyone watching. This was the version of herself she never permitted outside these walls. Unguarded, technically reckless, alive in a way that felt almost transgressive given everything the city had become. Grand Jeté carried her across the length of the floor. Fouettes blurred the room into pale streaks of light. Her muscles burned, clean and honest, and for a few minutes, she wasn't citizen ID 47839. Wasn't the daughter of people who had learned silence like a second language, wasn't anything the Dominion had a category for. She was just motion, just the body doing what it was made for. As she pulled into a tight pirouette, frost bloomed beneath her shoes. A thin, silver trace against the concrete, there and gone in an instant. She didn't notice. She never did. If she had, she might have remembered what her grandmother used to say in the years before the occupation made superstition sound like confession. The seasons still watch, even the ones they buried. The music swelled. Her heart surged against her ribs. The final sequence, the one she always saved, the one that felt most like falling and surviving simultaneously. Your transitions are cleaner than last week. Calliope stumbled, caught herself. Her heart slammed upward as she spun toward the voice. Serena stood in the doorway, light from the broken windows catching in her loose hair, a soft, unguarded halo of dark blonde that contrasted sharply with the hard lines of the mill. She looked like someone who belonged among people rather than machines. Green eyes open and steady, posture relaxed, without being careless. There was strength in her, too, though it sat beneath softer edges, the kind earned from endurance rather than force. Where Calliope dressed to disappear, Serena dressed for comfort and use, layers worn by repetition, textures chosen unconsciously. She gave the impression of someone who noticed when others hurt, and stayed. Serena with her bag slung low on one shoulder, watching with the expression she used when she was trying not to look impressed. Sorry, I wasn't quiet enough. The fear drained out slowly, the way it always did now, not snapping off but receding, leaving a residue. You're early. I thought the clinic had you until 5. Slow day. Serena crossed the floor toward her, steps careful and precise, a habit worn so deep it had become unconscious. 5 years of occupation had taught her body to move as though the air itself might report her. I wasn't going to miss this. It's the only part of the week that feels like mine." Calliope understood that. She didn't say so, because some things between them didn't need saying. They had grown up inside the same city-shaped fear, had learned the same survival arithmetic, what to show, what to hide, how to make yourself boring enough to be ignored. They'd known each other since before any of that calculus existed. The friendship had survived the occupation the way the oldest buildings had, by becoming load-bearing. "Your turn," Calliope said, rewinding the track. "Show me what you've been working on." Serena wasn't technically precise the way Calliope was, had come to dancing later without the obsessive years of isolated practice, but she moved with a kind of naturalness that training rarely produced, as though the music entered her body and made decisions without asking. Where Calliope was architecture, Serena was weather. They traded the lead for the better part of an hour, improvised sequences, collided, laughed when the timing fell apart. This was what the dancing actually was, beneath the movement itself, the fact of being together in a space the Dominion didn't own, doing something it hadn't sanctioned, feeling something it couldn't tax or quantify. Calliope drifted toward the window with the bent metal casing, the one they'd figured out years ago, the one that gave access to the fire escape without triggering anything. She glanced back. Serena was already reaching for her jacket. They climbed in familiar silence, boots finding the rust-eaten rungs by memory. The metal groaned softly, as it always did, a low sound like something tolerating rather than welcoming them. At the top, Calliope shouldered open the hatch and pulled herself onto the roof. The air shifted immediately. Sharper up here, colder. The kind of cold that came from elevation rather than season, that stripped away the city smell. Exhaust and fear, and whatever the Dominion burned in the processing facilities east of the river. She sat near the edge. Below, Valen arranged itself in its current form, checkpoints marking the intersections like infected nodes in an otherwise familiar grid, flood lamps casting harsh white light across corners that had once held market stalls. She had grown up in this city. She still knew the underlying shape of it, could trace the streets from memory, could name the buildings that were gone and list what had replaced them. The Dominion had been efficient about replacement. They didn't leave ruins. They preferred to overwrite. Serena settled beside her, knees drawn up to her chest. "No one ever looks up," she said. "That's why it still feels like ours." Calliope kept her voice low, not quite a whisper, just the register you used when you'd learned that habit without trying. For a while, anyway. The silence between them was comfortable in the way that long familiarity produced. Not the absence of things to say, but the understanding that not everything needed to be said immediately. The wind moved across the rooftop carrying rust and old cotton, and Calliope breathed it in without thinking. The light was going. The last of it moved across the roofline in a thin gold stripe before the building swallowed it. Serena nudged her shoulder. "You were dancing harder than usual." Calliope watched a patrol vehicle move through the street 3 blocks east, slow and precise, its searchlight sweeping the alleys with the methodical patience of something that had never once been in a hurry. "I needed to feel something that wasn't—" She stopped. "Fear," Serena said quietly. "Just for a little while." Serena rested her head against Calliope's shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Calliope was thinking, with the part of her mind that never fully stopped, that moments like this were becoming harder to trust, not because they were less real, but because the pressure around them was increasing, and she could feel it the way you felt weather before it arrived, a change in the quality of the air. She looked down at her hands. Nothing. Just scraped, tired fingers, cold from the altitude. She exhaled, flexed them once, let the relief come and go without making too much of it. "Curfew," Serena murmured. "I know." Neither of them moved yet. Calliope let her eyes trace the city one more time. The street where her mother had taught her to ride a bicycle. The corner where the baker used to put out extra bread at closing. the distant tower where the Dominion broadcast its daily announcements in a voice calibrated to sound like civic care. She knew this city by its before. The Dominion had worked hard to make people forget there was a before. That was part of how it worked. Not only force, but the slow erosion of reference points until what remained felt like it had always been this way. She stood. Serena took her extended hand and let herself be pulled up. They descended into the mill's interior and leaned against the wall, passing the water bottle. The exertion was draining out of Calliope's legs, leaving the familiar, pleasant ache. "I'm going to miss this," Serena said. Calliope looked at her. "You're not going anywhere. I mean when we're old, when our knees are finished with us." She smiled, but the smile had something careful in it. "When this place is just something we used to have? It's real. Whatever else isn't, this is." Serena was quiet for a beat. "They're increasing patrols again. I heard people talking at the clinic. Something's changed. Not the usual maintenance of order. This feels like they're actually looking for something." "They're always looking for something. This is different." She pressed her mouth together, considering. "Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Paranoia is an occupational hazard after 5 years." Calliope wanted to offer the reassurance, would have once, but they had made an agreement years ago, without ever stating it directly, not to insult each other's instincts with comfort they couldn't back up. "We should go," she said instead. They gathered their things without speaking, each automatically erasing evidence of their presence. It had become reflex long ago, not something they decided to do, but something their hands did while they thought about other things. The walk home took them through the occupied city's particular kind of silence, not absence of sound, but sound compressed and controlled. The low hum of surveillance equipment, footsteps that started and stopped, the specific acoustic texture of a place where people had learned to be quieter than they naturally were. Crimson uniforms at every corner, watching without appearing to watch. That was the refinement the Dominion had developed in the early years, when the overt aggression of the initial occupation had started generating resistance. They had learned, apparently, that presence was more effective when it felt inevitable rather than hostile. You couldn't argue with the weather. You couldn't organize against the idea that they had simply always been there. At 3rd Street checkpoint, the soldier took their papers and returned them in the same motion, already looking past them. They had calibrated themselves correctly, too regular to be interesting. This was the goal. Boring was a form of safety. 2 blocks from home, they passed an alley where a child, small, maybe 7, stood over a split bag of rationed bread, the loaves scattered across the gutter. She was crying the way children under occupation learn to cry, silently, shoulders shaking, without any expectation that someone would come. Calliope stopped. "Cal?" Serena said softly. Calliope was already crouching, gathering the loaves, brushing off the gutter water. "These are fine. Look, still good." The girl looked up at her with the expression Calliope had come to recognize and never become comfortable with, that particular child fear that wasn't about the immediate situation, but about all the situations layered behind it. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered. "It was an accident. Please don't tell them. My mama will—" "No one's telling anyone." Calliope pressed the bread into her arms. "Go home. Walk. Don't run." The girl went, quickly, without looking back. Serena helped Calliope stand. "You know, every time you do that, it's a calculation you're making." "I know. Kindness draws attention here." "I know that too." She brushed her hands off. She was 7 and she was terrified. There wasn't really a calculation. Serena was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's what makes you dangerous to yourself." She said it without judgment, almost with affection, which was the thing about Serena. She understood that it was a problem, and she also understood why Calliope couldn't stop doing it, and she held both of those things at the same time without demanding a resolution. Home was a fourth-floor apartment in a building that had been old before the occupation and was older now. The stairs creaked in their familiar sequence. The walls were thin, but there was warmth in the specific way the space held people. Her father's off-key humming carrying under the door, her mother's laughter at something he'd said, and Calliope had decided years ago that warmth was more structural than walls. "I'm home," she called, dropping her bag. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway first, tall, broad-shouldered, his weight settling unevenly as he leaned on the counter, favoring the leg that had never healed properly. His dark hair had gone gray faster than it should have, beard rough with the kind of neglect that came from prioritizing other things. There was nothing aggressive about him until there needed to be. The authority he carried was quieter than that, earned the hard way. Elena moved beside him without comment, gray hair pulled back neatly, apron folded with unconscious precision. She was slimmer, steadier, her presence anchoring the room in a way walls couldn't. Marcus watched doors. Elena watched people. Between them, the apartment held. Perfect timing. "Serena, you're staying," Marcus asked warmly. "If you're offering," Serena said, already relaxing in the particular way she only did inside this apartment. Elena's face wore that focused expression she wore when she'd been doing something she wasn't sure was worth worrying about. It cleared when she saw them. "How was practice?" "Good," Calliope said, kissing her cheek. "Working on something new. I'd love to see it someday. When things are different." The phrase they all used, placeholder for a future, they kept carefully vague because specificity felt like tempting something. Dinner was vegetable stew, stretched with day-old bread. Marcus told jokes that he found funnier than anyone else did. Elena reported on the small dramas of her sewing work. Serena talked about the clinic, carefully, about the cases she could mention, which was not all of them. Calliope described the new sequence she wanted to try, the technical problems she hadn't solved yet. Ordinary conversation, the kind that existed around all the things they didn't say. The rules in this apartment were unspoken and absolute, nothing that could be repeated outside these walls. The Dominion didn't need informants in every building. They had spent 5 years making people uncertain whether their neighbors were informants, which produced the same effect. You policed yourself, you kept the dinner table clean, but the love at the table was real. The warmth produced by 4 people who had chosen to keep showing up for each other. That was real. Calliope held on to that the way she held her fouettes, with something that was partly technical precision and partly the refusal to let go. The knock came in the middle of a laugh.